Aaron, I'm going to kick it over to you. I'm really looking forward to this, and definitely good luck, and we'll see you on the other side.
All right, sounds good. Thank you everybody for joining. Today, I wanted to share some experiences with you with Security Simplified with IdentityServer4. So in the title slide here, I've got my URL. You get to my LinkedIn, my handle on Twitter, and a bit.ly where I will have the presentation and code materials and links that are all referenced throughout the presentation for your easy access. And again, the bit.ly link will be on every slide, so in case you need to catch it later on. So first off, everybody welcome. Hope you've had a good day learning. And I'd like to see if you could maybe share or comment, if you've heard of IdentityServer4 or if you've used it in the past or looking into it. Or to get a gauge of the audience of what they know about IdentityServer4 or what they've heard. All right, so while y'all have to take time to kind of input your feedback there, I wanted to share with you what I hope to kind of convey during the presentation today. So first, learning the difference between authentication and authorization. This is really critical, regardless if you go with IdentityServer4. It's a good security concept to have down pat, regardless of what technology you use and where. Then we'll do a quick overview of OAuth 2.0 and OpenID Connect protocols and how they play into security and authentication and authorization. All right, thanks, Bill. Thanks for commenting. And then how IdentityServer4 can be used to secure your APIs, web, console, or Windows services, and mobile applications. And then finally, when to use IdentityServer4. And this would be based upon my experience and when I found it useful and when I found the most bang for the buck. And there might be situations where it's maybe not needed for your situation or what you're trying to protect. All right, so first off, authorization versus authentication. This is a critical piece of information to really have a good handle on when you're doing anything with security. So authorization basically is that if you think about, if you go to your kid's school, you get a temporary badge, you go to school for work, somebody is, basically signing a log and they're given a visitor pass and you're authorized to kind of go into the building and be chaperoned and kind of use the facilities or like a gym pass. Now, next thing, authentication, our driver's licenses. So our passports, we've been authenticated in that we've proven who we are and what we know, kind of pieces of identification about ourselves. So it's a little more in detail. So it's a good concept to kind of keep in mind between the two. Next, I'm not going to go into depth about OAuth 2.0 specifications and all the nitty-gritty RFCs, but sometimes when you're implementing something, it's good to know these details and to kind of go jump into them and read them at a fine-grained tune. But early on, if you're kind of trying to propose or review to see if IdentityServer4 or something like that is useful for you, you might need to kind of go into those things. But today, I want to just kind of make you aware of these links. And then here's the OpenID Connect specification. And we'll go into later on the difference between OAuth and OpenID Connect. So with OAuth 2.0, think of this protocol is really about authorization, authorizing somebody to use something or get information. And the biggest thing you can think of that's similar in this realm is where you authorize maybe Facebook or you're authorizing Google to verify some aspect of you. So in the concept of OAuth 2.0, we've got the authorization server, a resource owner, and a client. So authorization servers could be IdentityServer4, Azure AD, ON, Okta, and OAuth 0 all provide services in this area. Then a resource server is typically going to be like an API. And the resource owner is going to be maybe you if you have your own API or really the business. Then next we have client. That could be a console or a Windows service or any kind of application like that. Then you have an MVC application, which will have kind of an API kind of built in with the front end. Then a SPA, single page application, or like a native mobile application. So in this kind of next slides, what we'll kind of keep in mind is that the authorization server is going to be IdentityServer4 with a resource server of an API providing some basic information. And the resource owner is going to be the business, and the client that will first go through will be a console type application. Now, with OAuth 2.0, the main thing you want to kind of come away with understanding of is authorization grants, or sometimes I call them flows. It's kind of like the security process that you should choose to utilize given your type of client. And so one of the things you want to think about with client credentials, it's basically not a user, it's for computer-to-computer process. So in this example, it's maybe like a Windows service that's running somewhere that is going to interact with an API to get information. And so the client itself, the client is going to be the Windows service or the console, and it's going to interact with the authorization server to get permission to then call the API. Now, here's kind of a simple walkthrough of what's going to happen. And so it's going to start off with the console application is going to have client credentials. What this means is it's got a client name and a client secret. And so this will then present that information to the identity server. The identity server will validate the information. It's going to check more things than that as well, but that's kind of the main thing you need to keep in mind. Then the IdentityServer4 will generate an access token. The access token is then returned back to the console application, and the console application will then pass that as an access token over to the API. The API in turn will validate that information, and behind the scenes, I'm not showing it here, will talk to the IdentityServer4 and can validate that it's correct and signed correctly. And so this example, the console app is asking for information, and the information is then going to be returned as JSON. Simple data. So that's kind of a high flow, simple example for a very common process of where maybe you want to start to integrate some sort of control. So in the flows, there's two basic channels. You think of the front channel, which is typically a browser communicating to the IdentityServer4, and a back channel, which would be a web server talking to authorization server. So in this case, think of the web API talking to the IdentityServer4, or like in an MVC world, the back end of the web MVC client is then going to talk to the authorization server and do some level of verifications. Next, we have a implicit flow. This is commonly, I'm going to put air quotes here, was recommended for browser kind of SPA applications. But in the final review, we'll review later on where there's a new OAuth 2.1 specification that's coming out, and this kind of implicit flow is going to be kind of depreciated. So in the past, it was recommended kind of set up for single page applications. So it won't go too far into depth with that. So basically, I've got several different types of authorization grants or flows. So you have an authorization code, and the best choice is to use that with a proof of key code exchange, PKCE. You don't have to, you don't want to. Then the next is an implicit. This is the one that's going to be depreciated. It typically was recommended for a single page application for direct return of an access token. So it kind of short circuits the little flow we walked through before, to where it won't get an access code and then turn that in for an access code. Next, we have a refresh token. Refresh token is typically used to when your access token is going to expire, you utilize this flow to get an extension. Say when you initially authorize somebody or an application, an access token, it has a lifetime on it. And the lifetime might be a day, might be an hour, might even be a year. It kind of depends upon your application and your security needs. So the refresh token, say at the end of the day, you could pass this back and get the expiration time to be extended. Client credentials, we kind of talked about. So this is kind of a computer to computer or server to server type communication. Next, we have resource owner password credentials. This is the least secure. This is typically where you're going to enter in your username and password, and the client application, be it a web page or a console, then has access to see your username and password. This will be depreciated in OAuth 2.1. So sometimes this might be a situation where you need to utilize this with your putting IdentityServer4 and you want to put in and allow older legacy applications, and there's maybe no easy way to, maybe with classic ASP, to easily shoehorn it in. You might be an option you need to rely on or kind of need to test out, but know it's there, know it's going to change. And so when you get access tokens, there are two types. One is a reference token, which is more secured. It allows you to have more control over the lifetime, and the recipient then needs to kind of open a back channel to the token service to get a revalidation that they're allowed to use that. The simplest one is self-contained JWT tokens, and they're valid until they expire. So if you give your client a JWT token, and then that user that uses using that mobile application or their web page is then removed from being an employee or access, that token is still being good because there's no way to, in a sense, kill it or terminate it. So just be aware. Now, throughout, when you start working with JWT and OAuth 2.0, a lot of times you're going to want to inspect and see the information you're getting back. Are the pieces of the token correct? Do you have the right claims and the right sub pieces of information in there? And you can go to jwt.io website and paste in, and we'll show you later on where you get the actual token from, but then you can kind of break it down. In this example, there's got a header, and then you have a payload, and usually in the payload is where you would see the claims and the pieces that were turned back from your authorization server. So it's a good demo tool to have. All right, so what I wanted to do now is kind of jump in the first demo. And IdentityServer4 is written in C# and using .NET Core. And so I'm not sure if all y'all are familiar with that or utilize that. So that, just think of that as part of the overall solution. Waiting for the screen to update. Oh, I got this here. Let me toggle between what I'm sharing real quick. One second. Let me get the. Okay. And I'll wait for that to update on the presentation. Okay. So the layout we have is, this is a simple solution we've got set up. We have the identity server, which basically, think of this as a web server. And we're going to have an API that's going to return some basic data. And all the API is going to do is return the inside information of the claims and authorizations of the user. And then to start with, we're going to use a resource owner client. And so what I've done is make sure the startup products are identity server, the API, and the resource owner client. So I'm just going to run this real quick, and let me make sure I'm sharing the right information. because it has some screens pop up. Let's see. Okay. I'm gonna wait for that to update on the YouTube. Okay. So when I hit play, and let's see. Wait for the YouTube to update. So this will be the resource client, and this will be the IdentityServer4. Waiting for it to load and then refresh. So if you have any questions so far, please go ahead and post them in the chat, and I'll be sure to catch those as soon as we can. Of course, come on, demo gods. Okay, well, let's wait and hit a breakpoint, okay? So the main console is basically going to talk to the DNS server, and it's then going to request a client, and then it's going to talk to the API right here. So I forgot about the breakpoints. Okay. We have the client call. And then now we're on the controller for the API. We're just going to take the claims and return them back as JSON. Real simple operation. And so what we have here is we just dump from the console the access token. And this is what you can copy and paste and put into the jbt.io website to kind of decrypt. A lot of times you're going to want to do that to kind of debug to make sure you have the right information. Or, you could actually utilize a simple controller like this or method to kind of return the results to make sure you're seeing their information. So out of the claims, it's got an expiration timestamp, not good before timestamp, and audience. These are some of the claims about this is allowed to use, and my client is a read-only kind of role that was created. And we'll jump into more of those specifics. Into the scope, it's allowed to hit the API. So it's a very simple demo there. Go ahead and stop that. And we'll jump back to more of the code after the second demo. Okay. Now, next thing is OpenID Connect. So OAuth is really about authorization. It can be utilized to pseudo authenticate, if you will, a user, but it's traditionally just an authorization protocol. So OpenID Connect was then built on top of OAuth 2.0 to perform the real authentication. And with OpenID Connect, there are 4 specific flows or things that you can utilize. Now, authorization code is basically just for our server-side communication, like we saw. And then the preferred way going forward is going to be use authorization code with a PKE kind of key. This is going to be used for mobile applications that are native, SPA applications, web applications, because of the security risk it is to mitigate. Implicit was the previously recommended SPA, but is going to be depreciated. And if you can take the time to implement the PKE, it's well worth the protection. Hybrid is typically used for server side or mobile. Basically, it's does some of the, it's a combination of the other flows and makes it a little simpler to process. So the hybrid flow gives you kind of a verifiable token first before you make additional round trips. So the big takeaway here is utilize authorization code with the PKE if you can at all. Implicit, move away from it. The new specification is going to have it depreciated. So just keep those are the main two key points. So if you look at authentication or the authorization, so we have OAuth down below, and to move an OAuth, you have a discovery URL. That allows the calling application to see what things are available to be done against your identity provider. Then we have a token endpoint where they can get tokens, and then we have an authorization endpoint that's called to authorize. Then OpenID Connect is built on top of that, where you can request user information and kind of end the user session. The user information is typically the claims about what they're authorized to do and maybe some things about them. And just keep in mind, this could be personal identifiable information like email and those things. So you want to be careful and considerate about what's returned in the user information. And with IdentityServer4, you have the ability to control how much information is returned in both the authorization token and the identity token. You want to be careful specifically about the OAuth authorization token about what they call claims stuffing. You might be tempted to put all of your claims into the authorization token and have them there for easy access. If you have too many claims, it can cause adverse actions with trying to sign out and have kind of weird bugs in the sign out flow because of being too long to put, because it gets put on the URL. So just kind of keep that in the back of your mind. And so IdentityServer4 has the capability, it's got a log out and log in kind of quick screen that you can start with that is useful for kind of just getting up and running. You can customize its MVC. So if you want to, you can start with that, put your own branding on there, and kind of run with that. And you have the ability to kind of add additional providers to there. Let's see. Anything else? Okay, so now we're demo 2. So here in this demo, what I want to show you, we'll dive deeper into the code. And what we'll do is kind of walk through an MVC web application and a JavaScript kind of client as well. So let me change what I'm sharing. Okay. Okay, so what we're going to do is go to the same solution, and what we're going to do is have the MVC client be part of the startup, turn the resource owner off, and turn on the JavaScript client. And we have a simple MVC client and the JavaScript client, which is basically has some simple JavaScript to be the front end. Okay, give that a run. Okay, so we're just going to have 3 windows open up, one for the identity server, one for the JavaScript client, and one for the MVC client. And those finish loading on YouTube. Okay, so we see all 3. So we have localhost 5000, the IdentityServer4 running, and then we have our simple, our sample MVC kind of browser web application, and with JavaScript kind of browser, kind of a mimicking a SPA application on different ports. So if we go to secure and go and load up, and we should see a login screen. Now, when we hit secure, think of that as a login button. That's going to redirect us over to Identity Server. So what this is doing is this is reducing the location and the pieces of your code or the number of applications that the user's password and username will be exposed to. So this is kind of one of the benefits of implementing an OpenID kind of connect kind of flow. So it's going to have, in this account setup, we have a simple user called Bob with a simple password, and I'm not going to do remember. So if you were doing an external provider, you could utilize Google or some other source. We'll log in. I'm not going to save Bob's password. The first thing that you will see is a list of consent. That's the user needs to be notified of how the information could be utilized. Yes, allow. And what comes back is we're just returning from the API, like the same API before, where all the claims information, and actually this is just our access token and our refresh token. So we want to go see the details. We're going to call the API using our user token. And the breakpoint is calling the API. And returns are the same claims we saw before. Now, what may happen is in your application, you might have an API that needs to be called as a user, or you may have an API that needs to be called as actually the MVC application itself. So you don't need to authorize the user to call your second API. So in this example, we're going to use the MVC client's credentials and information to call another API. It's the same one, but it's going to be the client of the MVC and its ability to call the API. And if we go to logout, this is then going to redirect the user to Identity Server. And you're now logged out, and we can click here to go back to our client. So let me bring up, where's the browser page of the JavaScript client. So this is pretty much the same thing, just kind of showing that we can do, it's going to do a redirect. We'll log in with Bob, put our password in, and do a login. And allow consent. And again, we get the basic information about Bob back. And sometimes we talked about PII information. It might be here in your user claims. This is up to your application, what information you request and what information you put back in your tokens. So now we're going to just call the API. We hit our simple API. And the browser comes back with the claims, the expiration timestamp, and what this current token the user is allowed to do. And again, if we do log out, we're brought back to IdentityServer4, and here we're going to return right back to the JavaScript client. So the next thing, I want to check and see if any kind of questions. Okay, nothing yet. So please stop me anytime you see any questions, and we'll try and address those. So the major parts of that you're going to see when you download, and this project here, all these projects are provided by the IdentityServer4 open source maintainers. And for example, here, where if you're not familiar with .NET Core, it's basically one main startup class where you're going to configure all the services you're going to run and how they're going to run and in which order. So for simplicity, what we're running here is we're doing a developer signing credential. This is basically, hey, it's a temporary certificate. It's not a permanent signed certificate, and we can kind of get up running and quickly. Just be mindful when you get into the real world that you're going to want to address allowing multiple certificates for signing and rollover, and the documentation for IdentityServer4 addresses how to do that. Then we're going to add in-memory identity resources. This is the things, let's see, this is going to be the people, the users. Then we have in-memory API resources. These are API, the resources you want to protect. Then the clients, these are the consoles, the single page applications that you want. I'm sorry, identity resources is different than the users. here are users. Now, what you can do, they do have libraries straight out the box that allow you to work with any framework and automatically generate all the tables like in MySQL or SQL Server. You can run that out really simply. Then we're going to add an outside authentication service if you want it, like Google or Twitter. And basically when you register for Google or Twitter, you basically get a client ID and a secret and set it up. So it's pretty simple. An example is already there. And the run order is basically we're going to use identity server, static files, and MVC. So the first thing I wanted to jump into is, okay, where are the users and what do they look like in this kind of simple demo? So we'll go to here. So our users are basically an ID, username, and password, and claims. This is just information about them. And Bob, pretty simple. So we're going to collapse the users, and we're going to go to our clients. Now, right out the box, IdentityServer4 does not have a presentation or a screen to kind of allow you to do the administration of users or administration of your clients. And so we'll start at the top and go with so here's a client credential. So we started off with, so you just give it an ID, and then the grant type, what kind of flow or security flow checks process you want to go through. Secret, if you have a secret that kind of a password, if you will, that you want the client to present to you, and allowed scopes. And this is the APIs. So for OAuth 2.0, allowed scopes typically are APIs, the things you want to allow the client to utilize. And a resource owner password, this is where the user would put in the username and password. You just create a client ID and specify the grant type. And again, that client would typically have a secret as well and what you want to allow it access to. Now with an MVC client, you still give it a name and you give it a client ID and a client name. The grant types are hybrid and client credentials. And the client credentials come from the MVC portion, and then the front end, the hybrid portion, allows you to cover the users that would log in and utilize it. So anytime you use OpenID Connect, you have to have a redirect URI, and that's just what's called back after a user logs in. So IdentityServer will see this and automatically be brought back to this. So when a client, in this case, the MVC application, connects to IdentityServer, it needs to present this information. This adds a simple level of security. Then a post logout redirect. It's where do you want the user to be redirected to? And again, this has to match. So allowed scopes for OpenID are more than just the API. It's what do you want to allow to see information about the user? And so we always have the OpenID and then profile the information about the user. And then for our JavaScript clients, it's pretty much the same except for we've went to implicit. Of course, this is now one you would want to depreciate to the newer style, and so then you have a cores aspect as well that's added to the configuration. So that's the clients. Okay, and then if you have an API, it's as simple as this. You list your API and what you want to call it. There are more advanced options you can get into, like requiring special user scopes and those things. But typically, for getting started, you don't have to worry about that. So identity resources, this is what's kind of allowed to be utilized. All right, let's go back to the startup class. And okay, so that's there. Let me make sure any questions. Okay. So the next piece of code we want to see is, well, how do we protect the API? How does the API know to use the identity server? And how does it, check the things that are going to call it? So we configure the main services. We're going to add MVC core in this case, add authorization, add JSON formatters, and then we're going to add authentication of a bearer type. I'm going to register identity server authentication, and this is location and basic configuration, and this is the API name here. So basically, it's going to check and see, is this API allowed to connect and register itself to be protected? And then we have some basic cores. So that's pretty much all the minimum you need to get your API up and protected. Now, if we go to the controller of the API, all we're doing is going up here. We're just saying authorized, which means protected. And then this example, when it's called the get, it's just going to look at the user information, get all their claims, and then return it back as JSON. So it's very simplistic. Now, one of the key things I want to point out is that what you want to make sure you do in the recommended approach is that anytime you come into an API method, you don't know how long before that access token was granted. It could have been a day, an hour, or a minute. And so there could be a point in time where the user was authorized 15 minutes later. Then if it's a critical application, say a doctor or something like that, getting access to medicine that you want to really control, you at this point in time would want to go back and check the authorization of what is this user allowed to do. Go back and get their specific claims and validate the claims again. So it's kind of what I refer to as kind of belt and suspenders. So yes, you got their initial information, but there's always a chance that something could have changed. So it's always best to, at the point of calling the API, to double check that. So then we'll go into our MVC application of how do we register that to work with IdentityServer. So we're going to set up a JBT security token handler. We're going to add authentication of cookies and a challenge scheme of OIDC. Then we're going to configure our OpenIDC, and we're going to reference our identity server main URL. We're going to put in our client ID, our client secret, and response type of this is the hybrid of working with a code and an identity token. Do we want to save the tokens? And do we want to get the claims from the user information endpoint? This means, do we want to make a separate round trip to get specific information about the user information? And then scope, we want this application, MVC, we want to allow access to API 1. We're requesting access to API 1. Now on the JavaScript side, it's pretty much the same. Let me find there is an OIDC -client, the JavaScript that you can download that has all the code built into it. Does not create this, it's an open source, you can download and include. And in the basic JavaScript, let's see, go to the top. So we have some basic logging function. And we're going to have our login, API logout, and configuration. We're going to set, okay, our authorization server, here's our client name, our redirect, where do we get redirected back to after sign in, and response type, what type of information we want from the authorization server. In this case, we want a token and an ID token. The scope, what do we want to utilize? We want to utilize the OpenID, we want to utilize the user's profile, and the API. And then when a person logs out, please send them back to here. And so in order to log in, we're just going to use the open source library, user manager, and just call sign in redirect. And that's what we saw them redirected back to IdentityServer4. And when you're authenticated, they'll come back to us. And so here's a sample call of we want to utilize the API that was protected. And so here's the URL of the API and the method we want to call. We're going to do a get and a function. We're going to send the request using a bearer token, and here's the access token send. And then when the results comes back, we just log the information out. It's pretty simple. It should be enough for anybody to kind of get started playing around and seeing, is this, something that's going to work for you. So any questions so far? Okay. Let me go back to my presentation. Let me Okay. So one of the main things is like, okay, well, when should you use IdentityServer4? What are the things you need to think about? So first, like I said, it uses .NET Core, so one, and C#. So one, you've got to be either willing to learn it or maybe have a team or a set of people that can support that. If you're going to utilize it, there are a series of templates that allow for quick starting besides just the libraries that are open source kind of quick start templates. You can use a .NET New -I IdentityServer4 to get a bunch of templates already. So where I've utilized this before and came in really handy was I worked at a company that had a product that was used for internal users and external users. So if you only have internal users, you can probably go with Active Directory or some other authorization mechanism. The real power comes when you have external users. So I've used this before where our application had its own user bank, if you will, of users and passwords, and it's really easy to tie a Identity Server to that portion of the application. And it has capability of tying into JavaScript code. It has the ability to tie into web forms. It has the ability, you can shoehorn it working with classic ASP and of course, .NET Core in the different versions. But the real advantage is you're then going to you're going to be able to implement OAuth 2.0, soon 2.1, and OpenID Connect standards, where this was critical for my projects was part of the interface of applications to exchange information with other customers that were more advanced and wanted to use APIs and not just our front ends, was to have a standard security practice in place where it wasn't something that was built in-house or maybe just a token on a URL. We've probably all seen those different variations and they work. But if you're going to start working with bigger companies and need to kind of have speed of development or integration, it's going to go a lot faster if you utilize those standards. Then as well, when you come into those realms, you're going to have different security scans you're going to probably have to go through with White Hat and other services. And so these will help you pass those and make sure you're more likely compliant than not. Then one thing to think about is security is like life insurance. Everybody should probably have some sort of life insurance, but how much you have and how much you need, it's really up to you. There's no, you've got to be the judge of what's the right amount of security for your product, where it is in maturity, and what the type of resources you need to protect. And then think of long-term where you maybe need to expose other APIs or other aspects down the road. So hopefully this kind of gives you some starter insight into how IdentityServer4 could help you get security simplified and running quickly and following the actual protocols and not having to code everything out of yourself. You can use things already created. So in the GitHub repository in the README page, I've got these links. So there's an OAuth 2.0, great walkthrough and kind of detailed. OpenID Connect flows are a little more precise examples. Okta, third-party service that does software as a service. And then another thing, if you're going to do IdentityServer4, one of the pros are you could utilize it for single sign-on and single sign-out. So there's a way to do that with IdentityServer4. Then a link to kind of why not use OAuth 2.0 resource owner password. So less of a critical nature going forward since it's going to be depreciated. But again, the key point here is that when you use that, your JavaScript application or the MVC application is collecting the username and password, going to have access to that and pass that through. If you can if you can step away and not use that, that's one layer of that information flowing through that won't have access to that. So GitHub location of where they have the master sample called quick starts. There's a series of quick starts that are in there that already have the solutions I went over in separate locations. Then another article that was really important to me was kind of encrypting the identity tokens that are served. Here's another example or documentation on the single page web application authentication and authorization. That might be useful for you as well. And then there's also IdentityServer4 has got a demo server that's always running that you can utilize to kind of play with without having to set up your own. So you can kind of create your own mock client with those credentials and information like we saw. You don't have to have the backend server running to kind of get some level of demo aspect from it, which might help you kind of create a quick RFP or a demo to your colleagues to say, hey, this might make sense, and get some quick feedback. So wanted to see if there's any questions about what we've talked about. And again, if you need to reach me for further communication, I've got my Twitter, Instagram, Stack Overflow, my blog, and HTTP goes to my LinkedIn in case you want to connect there. And again, the bit.ly short link is BSidesOK -IdentityServer4. One of the things I kind of wanted to show while see if there are any kind of questions is the process of tying in an existing database. This is something that I answered on a Stack Overflow question. So it's in the short links help section on GitHub, but I think it's always critical to kind of see, how do you connect? Where's my sharing screen? Give me 1 second while I see where my screen go. Where's my Zoom? Oh. Okay, sorry about that. Let's go to the screen and share. Okay. So this is going to be a common need for most people of, if you're using IdentityServer4, you're going to want to look to protect your user information and have them all route through, one central login screen where you control the quality of that, and maybe your sign out other options. And so you've got to create a couple of different classes, and basically what you're going to do is then you would link up into your existing database to get all the claims and build all the claims into a list to respond back to your client side. So you can determine what makes sense to put in the claim and what makes sense for your given application. And so let's see, basically a user manager is created to talk to the client store and the context, and then log in, sign in. So most of this is we've already seen, but this will kind of give you details of how to connect that database straight in. So this should be kind of, hope this will be helpful to you. All right. So any questions? I'd like to, see if I can help you, direct you, or kind of guide you in any kind of way. So what questions do y'all have out there? Does this look like something you might be interested in utilizing in protecting your APIs or enhancing your security for your users? Oh, great. Somebody's using it. So Kimberly, I hope this was helpful, or if you'd like to share any insight, please feel free to. I went through a several month process when I first implemented this at one company to kind of learn all the ins and outs of the flows. And that was the most confusing part for me, was understanding the different code flows and then how those were then interpreted into how you set the configurations up for those things. So hopefully that kind of gets you past that kind of quick start, that kind of hurdle of just getting running. The next challenge you might have in a larger organization is that if you've got 3 or 4 different products and you're trying to merge those together, your logic of what the claims are and what the person is authorized to use, that will become more complex. One of the major benefits that I worked at the software as a service company was that we were moving, we had like 30 different applications, and some of those applications had their own SAML integrations for external users. So instead of putting that in each application, we centralized that in IdentityServer4 and as a federated place of sign-in authorization. So we wanted to put that in one place. So then if a customer had product A and they had already had set up a SAML configuration and integration with us, and they wanted to start using product B, we didn't have to do anything else to their side to allow for ease of access of verifying their users. So again, different types of consolidation can help out. All right, Chris, thanks for the time and opportunity, and I hope everybody has a great day.
Aaron, thank you so much. Definitely, thank you for joining us, and we hope to have you again soon. You guys don't forget that the Information Warfare Summit is coming up soon. The call for papers is out now. Aaron,
Okay.
I would encourage you, if you get a chance, to also send some papers into there. I always enjoy listening to your talks. You touched on a few pieces that even I feel a bit uncomfortable with. So there's places I know I need to expand as a person. So I would encourage you, definitely come join us. I'll be submitting talks to that one as well. So hopefully we get to see you again here in just a few months. That's in October. So it's only 3 months away. So
all right, sounds good.
less than 3 months away. So we try to space them out, but COVID ruined everything. So, but Aaron, this was a huge help. Thank you so much. Guys, just to let you know, we are doing a closing remarks over in track 1. So we encourage you guys to join us. We'll be doing a raffle. We'll explain how it works here in just a little bit. It's a little weird having a virtual raffle, but we'll put some stuff in your swag bags and really help you guys out. So Aaron, again, thank you so much. It's great having you.
Thank you. And if anybody is interested in talking and wants to know how to get started, please feel free to reach out. This is only my second conference that I've done. So I'd be glad to help out anybody that's, wants to learn not just speaking, but anything technology related. So y'all take care and have a great day. And thanks for accepting my talk, Chris.
Thanks, Aaron.
All right. Bye.
Bye-bye.